back to 1090. In our previous session, we discussed planning, teacher readiness, and implementation system. And today, we are taking that discussion one step further. How do we actually set up a STEM lab properly? And this is where many schools feel confused, isn't it?
Exactly. Some schools feel they need a huge budget. Before even starting, some schools rush into purchasing equipment immediately, and in some cases, schools build very impressive looking labs, but later struggle to use them consistently. So the challenge is not just creating a STEM lab. The real challenge is creating a STEM space that schools can actually sustain and use effectively every week. What is your take on this, Sangeeta?
Right, Gautam. And that is exactly what today's discussion is about. Not complicated infrastructure, not expensive interiors, but practical STEM implementation. How schools can set up STEM smartly, prioritize the right thing, and avoid common mistakes during implementation.
So let's start with one more important mindset shift. A successful STEM lab is not defined by appearance, it is defined by usability. Because at the end of the day, schools should ask questions like, can students work comfortably? Can teachers manage activities smoothly? Are materials organized properly? Can session happen regularly without confusion? Those are the things that truly decide whether a STEM lab succeeds or fails.
And honestly, we have seen this very clearly across schools. Some very simple classrooms run amazing STEM sessions consistently with high student engagement. At the same time, some expensive labs remain locked, most of the time because the implementation systems were never built properly. So, infrastructure alone never guarantees success.
Exactly, because finally, STEM is not about how advanced the room looks. It is about how effectively the space is being used for learning. And once schools understand this clearly, planning becomes much simpler and much smarter.
So the next question comes, what does a school actually need to get started? And honestly, most schools need far less than they initially imagined. In the beginning, 4 things are usually enough to create a highly functional STEM system.
A flexible working area where students can collaborate comfortably.
Organized storage system so material remain easy to access and maintain.
Safe student movement within space during activities.
And finally, clear systems for usage, handling, and maintenance.
That's it. School does not need massive infrastructure on day one. Because in the early stage, consistency matters much more than size or appearance. And honestly, schools that start simple often build stronger system over time.
One practical way to organize a STEM space is by dividing the room into simple functional zones. For example, an activity zone for hands-on work, a storage zone for materials and kits, and a display zone to showcase the student projects, and a facilitation zone for teacher instruction and coordination.
And this small change itself improves management significantly. Student knows where to work, teachers know where materials belongs. Movement becomes smoother and sessions become more structured and less chaotic.
In fact, many schools can convert existing classrooms into effective STEM spaces without major renovation. Because proper organization and system are always more important than expensive interiors. Now, once school understands the setup basic, the next important discussion is budgeting. And honestly, this is where many schools overspend unnecessarily. Sometimes schools focus heavily on making the lab look impressive before the actual implementation process becomes stable.
So the easiest way to approach budgeting is by separating needs into 2 categories, must-haves and nice-to-haves. Must-haves usually include basic working tables, simple storage, starter STEM tools, safety essentials, and proper organization systems. Whereas nice-to-have upgrades include things like premium interiors, designer furniture, decorative branding, and advanced display systems. These things are valuable, but they are not necessary for starting successfully.
A STEM lab should grow step by step. It does not need to look perfect immediately. What matters most is whether students are learning consistently and teachers are able to conduct sessions smoothly.
Now, this brings us to a very important point. Even a well-designed STEM lab can fail if implementation systems are weak. Because setting up the infrastructure is only the beginning. The real challenge is sustaining implementation over months and years.
And honestly, most schools do not struggle because of lack of interest. Usually, the problems come from small but avoidable gaps like unclear responsibilities, irregular sessions, poor follow up, or lack of teacher support. And over time, those small gaps slowly affect momentum.
Exactly. So let us now discuss one of the most common implementation mistakes schools face after setup. One major mistake is treating STEM like a one-time event instead of making it part of a regular learning.
Sometimes schools conduct one exhibition, one workshop, or one activity day, and initially excitement is very high, but after that implementation slowly become irregular.
And once consistency fades, momentum also starts reducing. Teachers lose confidence in conducting sessions regularly, students stop engaging actively, and eventually the lab becomes underutilized.
Another important issue is lack of regular observation and review. Because if implementation is not monitored continuously, small operation problems slowly become much bigger challenges later. That is why continuous support becomes extremely important. Teachers need regular guidance, practical feedback, observation, and implementation support throughout the journey.
This is something we strongly believe at TAN 90. Schools should build systems that continue smoothly long term, not systems that depend only on occasional events or one-time activities.
So before we close, let us quickly summarize today's discussion. Start functional, not fancy. Build system before scaling. Focus on usability over appearance. Support teachers continuously. And most importantly, create structure that school can sustain long term. Because successful STEM implementation is not about building one perfect room. It is about creating consistent learning experience for students year after year.
So, before we end, here is one question for everyone watching. If you had to choose one factor most important for STEM success, what would it be? We hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Thank you for joining us. Stay connected with TAN 90. Thank you.